The state agent called his land worthless. He grew heritage wheat and sold it for 10 times the price. The state agricultural agent arrived on a Tuesday morning in early April of 2001, and he had a clipboard and a measuring wheel and no particular urgency about any of it. Raymond Stuckey watched him from the porch of the farmhouse. The agent was 30 years old at most. He had the look of someone who had passed the required examinations, received a government vehicle, and had since done what he was told. Raymond was 61. Had been farming this same 320 acres in Grant County, Kansas, since 1974. The agent walked the east field first. He moved along the fence line, with the measuring wheel rolling behind him, stopping at intervals to write on the clipboard. Then the south field. Then back to the truck. He spent 40 minutes on ground that Raymond had spent 27 years on. Raymond had known for 2 decades which corners held frost longest in spring, which rows cracked first in a July dry spell, which section of the south fence collected enough wind-blown topsoil each winter to raise the grade by half an inch. The agent's measuring wheel did not record any of that. The soil in Grant County ran clay-heavy in sections, not uniformly. The east field had decent structure in its upper third, loamy enough to hold a reasonable yield in most years. The problem was the lower quarter of Raymond's property, where the land dipped toward a dry creek bed that ran water maybe 6 weeks in a typical year. Down there, the clay ran 18 inches deep before you hit anything workable underneath. In a dry summer, it cracked into plates. In a wet spring, it held standing water for 3 weeks at a stretch. Raymond had known this when he bought the land in 1973 for $47 per acre. He had bought it because $47 was what he could afford. The agent came back to the truck after an hour and 40 minutes. He had a form on the clipboard. State Agricultural Land Assessment Form 17B. He filled in boxes standing at the truck hood and used Raymond's tailgate to rest the board on. Raymond stood nearby, said nothing. The agent said the assessment put his land in productivity class D marginal, the lower 12% of assessed agricultural land in Grant County. He said it the way a mechanic tells you the rear brakes need replacing. Informational, not personal. The assessment would affect Raymond's subsidy applications, his crop insurance rate calculation, his county property tax valuation going forward. The agent left the carbon copy on the tailgate and drove east toward Liberal without stopping. Raymond picked up the form, read it twice in the wind, folded it, and put it in his shirt pocket. Productivity Class D. The word the agent had used was marginal. He had used the word worthless once, in a specific context about the lower acreage's commercial potential relative to input costs. Raymond was not certain if it had been a technical term or a personal observation. He did not ask. That spring, Raymond planted the east field with Everest hard red winter wheat. It was the variety his co-op in Ulysses had been recommending for 5 years running. High-yield genetics. Disease-resistant. Developed specifically for southwest Kansas conditions by the Kansas State University Extension Program out of Garden City. He planted 160 acres. The seed ran $18.50 per 40-pound bag. He bought 24 bags. He also applied pre-emergent herbicide at $9.40 per acre and anhydrous ammonia nitrogen at the co-op's recommended rate. The summer of 2001 was dry, not drought dry. 72% of normal precipitation through July. The Everest variety needed consistent soil moisture through the flagleaf and heading period. It did not get it. Raymond walked the east field in late June and watched the stalks come in shorter than the seed catalog had specified. The head smaller, thinner, the kind of crop that looked acceptable from the road and told a different story up close. Harvest came in early August. He pulled 28 bushels per acre on the east field. The Grant County average that year was 41 bushels. His neighbor to the east, Carl Brower, farmed ridge ground on loam soil. Brower ran a newer John Deere combine and pulled 54 bushels per acre that year. He mentioned it at the grain elevator in Ulysses in the first week of September. Mentioned it to no one in particular, the way a man mentions something when he wants it to be heard. Raymond sold at $2.89 per bushel. The elevator docked him for low test weight. Net return after input costs, seed, fertilizer, fuel, herbicide, and the combine hours came to $11.40 per acre on 160 acres. The gross return on the entire crop was $1,824. He had spent $2,960 on inputs alone. The numbers sat on a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table for 3 weeks before he put it in a drawer. His wife Doreen said nothing about the legal pad. She had been doing the farm books since 1978. She knew the numbers as well as he did. She knew the drawer he put it in. By October, Raymond had filed for the Emergency Crop Loss Assistance Program through the USTA office in Ulysses. The form required his land productivity classification. He wrote Class D in the box. The program calculated assistance based partly on the expected yield ceiling for the classification. For Class D ground in Grant County, that ceiling was 32 bushels per acre. His actual yield of 28 bushels fell within the anticipated range. That was the problem. The program had been designed for exactly his situation. The government expected him to pull 20 to 28 bushels per acre on Class D ground, and he had done exactly that. The subsidy existed to soften the predictable failure of marginal land. It assumed Raymond's land would never do better. The form had a box for everything. There was no box for what would happen if the land did something unexpected. That thought stayed with Raymond longer than the crop loss did. At the feed store in Ulysses in November, Dale Pruitt from the co-op said some ground in the county just wasn't suited to modern varieties. He said it in the middle of a conversation about enrollment windows and input pricing for the following year. Said it the way you say something when you expect agreement rather than argument. Raymond bought his supplies and drove west on Highway 160. The following February, Raymond drove 38 miles south to Lakin to visit his uncle, Martin Stuckey. Martin was 84 years old. He had not farmed actively since 1989, when his knees had made it practical for him to stop. He still lived in the same house he had built in 1958. Still kept the barn locked. Still oiled the tractor and the disc harrow twice a year, before winter and after it. Out of a habit he saw no reason to break. Raymond sat with Martin at the kitchen table and told him about the Class D assessment, about the Everest wheat, about the $11.40 per acre. He put the legal pad on Martin's table and let the old man look at it. Martin looked at the numbers for a moment. Then he got up and went to the barn. He was gone for 8 minutes. He came back carrying a metal tin, the kind that had once held hard Christmas candy, the sort sold at the dime store in cellophane bags. The lid was sealed shut with brown masking tape, brittle and yellowed. On the tape, written in pencil and handwriting Raymond recognized as his grandfather Walter's, Turkey Red. 1966. Martin set it on the table between them. There were 8 pounds of seed inside. Martin had kept it the way old farmers keep things they cannot bring themselves to throw out. No particular plan, just not done with them yet. Turkey Red wheat had built the Kansas grain industry. Mennonite settlers brought it from the Crimean steppe in the 1870s, carried it across the ocean in their luggage and their coat pockets, because they recognized what they were walking into. The plains of southwest Kansas reminded them of the land they had come from. Hard soil, dry wind, wide flat distances that went to the horizon without interruption. Turkey Red had been bred over generations for exactly those conditions. It established in poor ground, held through dry years, put out grain when other varieties failed. For nearly a century, it had been the foundation wheat of the region. By the 1960s, Kansas state agronomists had developed hybrid varieties that yielded significantly more in controlled and favorable conditions. Favorable conditions meaning Class A or Class B ground, adequate moisture through the growing season, modern nitrogen programs, and compatible herbicide applications. Under those conditions, the hybrids outperformed Turkey Red by 30 to 40%. The co-op system moved to hybrids. The elevator system rewarded volume over quality. Turkey Red, which had kept Kansas farming alive for 90 years, was quietly retired from commercial planting. Most of the seed stock had been plowed under or sold off, or left to age in tins in barns where old farmers kept things they weren't ready to let go of. Raymond drove home from Lakin with Martin's tin on the passenger seat. He planted 40 seeds in a tray of topsoil in the kitchen window the last week of February. Set it on the sill where it got morning light. 12 of the 40 germinated. 30% viability out of 35-year-old seed. Low, but not zero. There was still something working inside it. He called the Kansas State University Extension Office in Garden City and asked what they had on Turkey Red wheat. The agent on the phone put him on hold twice. When she came back, she told him they did not have an active research program on that variety, but offered him the name of a preservation organization in Salina. The Plains Heritage Seed Library. She read him the phone number. Raymond called Salina on a Monday morning. He spoke with a man named Gerald Owens, who ran the library's grain program and had been doing so since 1994. Gerald told him Turkey Red certified seed was available through the library at $4.80 per pound. He also said that 3 specialty flour mills in Colorado and New Mexico had been actively seeking heritage grain growers in the past 2 years. A premium market was developing, he said. He said it carefully, like a man who had learned not to make promises on behalf of other people's markets. Raymond asked what kind of premium. Gerald said it varied by buyer and season. Said the mill in Albuquerque had been paying $28 per bushel on direct contract the previous season. The year before that it had been $24. Raymond pulled the yellow legal pad from the drawer, wrote $28 at the top of a clean page. Below it, $2.89. He looked at those 2 numbers side by side for a long time. Then he folded the pad and left it on the kitchen table where he could see it when he walked through. He ordered 120 pounds of Turkey Red certified seed from the Plains Heritage Seed Library in Salina. It arrived by UPS on March 14, 2002, $576 for the seed. He opened the box at the kitchen table. Doreen stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at the contents without saying anything. He planted 80 acres of Turkey Red on the South Field in late March of 2002. The South Field was the lower quarter of his property. The clay-heavy ground the assessment agent had spent the most time measuring with his wheel. The ground that had scored worst on Form 17B. The ground the co-op would have told him to leave in a conservation program and take the government payment on. He used his 1971 International Harvester grain drill. It needed a new press wheel bearing before he could plant. He ordered the part from a farm equipment dealer in Dodge City and replaced it himself over 2 afternoons in the machine shed. Parts cost $94. He went through a quarter tank of propane on the shop heater those 2 days. Gerald Owens had told him spring planting at this latitude could work for Turkey Red, but to expect delayed heading, July rather than June, and to plant heavier than the standard hybrid rate. 60 pounds per acre instead of the 45 the co-op recommended for Everest. Turkey Red needed the denser stand to shade out early-season weeds without chemical input. Raymond did not apply herbicide on the Turkey Red field. The old variety had not been bred for compatibility with modern herbicide chemistry. The chemistry would damage the crop. He cultivated between rows twice in May. Once with the tractor pulling the cultivator at low ground speed, moving carefully through rows that were 4 inches shorter than he was used to working around. Once on foot with a long-handled hoe, where the tractor's outer toolbar could not reach the fence corners. He spent 14 days on the cultivation. His work boots wore a visible path along the south field fence line before he finished. Doreen walked the south field with him on a Thursday afternoon in late May. The Turkey Red plants stood 11 inches tall. The color ran darker green than the Everest wheat on the east field. The straw shorter and stiffer. At the south fence line, where a mule deer had pulled up 2 plants during the night, the root structure was exposed to the air. Raymond crouched down and dug a comparable sample from the east field with his pocket knife. He held both root systems in his open palm and compared them. The Turkey Red root ran 3 inches deeper than the Everest root from identical planting depth. He photographed both root systems with a disposable Kodak camera, mailed the prints to Gerald Owens in Salina in a regular envelope. Gerald called back within the week, confirmed what Raymond had seen. Turkey Red's root architecture had been selected over generations on the Crimean steppe and then on the Kansas plains to reach subsoil moisture that shallow-rooted varieties could not access. On clay-heavy ground with poor surface drainage, the deep root system was pulling water from layers the hybrid wheat above it was completely unaware of. The state agent's Form 17B had identified the clay as the reason the land was marginal. Raymond kept thinking about the fact that the clay was also the reason Turkey Red might work. June came in dry, the driest June in Grant County since 1988. The National Weather Service office in Dodge City issued an agricultural advisory the second week of the month. The Everest wheat on the east field went into visible moisture stress by June 17th. Raymond walked the east field that morning and saw the flag leaves beginning to roll. Rolling leaf blades were a stress response, the plant closing its surface area to reduce moisture loss. He had seen it before. He knew what it usually meant for yield. He walked directly to the south field. The Turkey Red was standing without rolling. 14 days behind the east field in growth stage, but without visible stress indicators. The leaves flat, the color holding. The deep roots were reaching water the clay had been storing since March. Water the Everest wheat on better ground could not reach because its roots had never needed to go looking for it. Raymond stood at the edge of the south field for 4 minutes. He did not move or speak. Then he walked back to the house. Harvest on the Turkey Red field came in the 3rd week of July. Raymond ran the combine across the south field for 3.5 days, moving slowly to keep the reel speed correct for the shorter straw. The yield came to 22 bushels per acre. On 80 acres, that was 1,760 bushels total. Lower than what hybrid wheat would have produced on Class A ground in a good year. But this was not a good year, and this was not Class A ground. The established expected yield for Class D ground under conventional wheat in a dry year growing season was 18 to 24 bushels per acre. Turkey Red had come in at the top of that range on its first season in this soil, with no herbicide program, with a non-optimal planting date, and through the driest June in 14 years. The test weight ran 62 pounds per bushel. Standard commercial grade required 60 pounds per bushel for full market price, with no dockage. The Everest wheat on the east field in a dry year sometimes came in at 57 or 58. The elevator had docked Raymond for low test weight the previous season. He called the flour mill in Albuquerque, whose name Gerald had given him. A man named Thomas Garrett handled grain purchasing for the mill's Heritage Grain program. Raymond told him what he had: 1,760 bushels of turkey red, certified seed origin from the Plains Heritage Seed Library. Spring planted, July harvest, Grant County, Kansas, southwest corner of the state. Garrett asked about test weight, moisture content at harvest, and varietal documentation. Raymond had all three in writing. Garrett said he would need a 2-pound grain sample for protein analysis and could respond with a contract price within 10 business days. Raymond weighed the sample on the kitchen scale, put it in a padded brown envelope, drove it to the Up store in Liberal on a Tuesday afternoon. Thomas Garrett called back on the 8th day. The protein content on the sample had come in at 14.2%. Standard premium hard red winter wheat required a minimum of 12% for the top grade designation. Heritage variety from certified seed stock commanded an additional premium for specialty and artisan milling applications, Garrett explained, because the protein structure in older wheat varieties produced different baking characteristics than modern hybrids, characteristics that artisan bakers were willing to pay for. He offered Raymond $29 per bushel on a purchase contract for the full 1,760 bushels. $29 per bushel. The co-op elevator in Ulysses had paid $2.89 per bushel the year before. Raymond did the math on the legal pad. Gross on 1,760 bushels at $29 was $51,040. Total input costs on the 80-acre turkey red field for the season had come to $2,840. That included the certified seed at $576, the press wheel bearing parts at $94, cultivation labor and fuel, the soil amendment he had applied in March, and the shipping cost of the sample envelope. Net return per acre on the turkey red field came to $600.25. The Everest wheat the year before had returned $11.40 per acre on better ground. Raymond accepted the contract. The mill arranged transport. A semi-truck from Albuquerque backed up to Raymond's grain bin on a Tuesday morning in mid-August. The driver connected the auger and ran all 760 bushels out of the bin in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Raymond stood near the bin through the whole load out. Doreen came out from the house with 2 cups of coffee and stood with him for the middle hour of it. Gerald Owens heard about the sale through communication in the Plains Heritage Seed Library network. He called Raymond in September to ask if Raymond would be willing to speak with 2 other farmers in the library's grower database who farmed Class C and Class D ground in western Kansas and southeastern Colorado. Raymond told him he would. The state agricultural agent who had written Productivity Class D on Form 17B did not call, did not visit. The assessment remained on file. Raymond had put it back in the drawer after harvest. The form was still accurate. The land was still Class D. The following spring, Raymond planted 140 acres of turkey red. The full south field and the lower portions of the east field, where the clay ran deepest and the hybrid wheat had always performed worst. He contracted with the Albuquerque mill at $26 per bushel as a base price for the 2003 season, with a premium adjustment clause written in if protein content on the delivered grain came in above 13.5%. The 2003 crop came in at 14.7% protein. The premium clause paid out. Final price on delivery, $30 per bushel. He also sold that year to a second buyer, a stone-ground mill in Taos, New Mexico, that had found his listing in the Plains Heritage Seed Library's producer directory. The Taos mill paid $31 per bushel. Delivered, Raymond loaded the contracted portion onto his truck himself, drove the load to Taos in September. Doreen rode with him. They spent a night in a motel in Raton, New Mexico on the way back. Ate supper at a diner on the highway. Neither of them mentioned what they were driving back from. By the spring of 2004, Raymond was supplying 3 mills. The Albuquerque operation remained the anchor buyer. A heritage grain program at a stone ground mill in Fort Collins, Colorado, had contacted him through Gerald Owens in the fall of 2003, and he had contracted with them for the 2004 season. A bakery cooperative in Kansas City had sent a written inquiry in the winter. Raymond had it on the kitchen counter and was thinking about it. The Plains Heritage Seed Library included Raymond's farm in their active producer directory in 2003. One of 4 Turkey Red growers listed in the state of Kansas. The listing generated 12 buyer inquiries over the following 18 months. Raymond answered each one by phone. He accepted 3. He was not interested in scale beyond what the land and his attention could support properly. Carl Brower, his neighbor to the east on the Loam Ridge ground, brought up heritage wheat at the feed store in Ulysses in the spring of 2004. Said he had been reading about the premium markets, asked Raymond what the startup costs looked like and what the certification process required. Raymond told him about the Plains Heritage Seed Library, about Turkey Red's root structure and why it performed the way it did in dry conditions, about the cultivation requirements and the reduced herbicide program, about the protein testing process for premium sale qualification. He did not explain the part about Turkey Red's yield behavior on high-quality loam soil. That was Carl's question to answer on his own ground. Carl planted 20 acres of Turkey Red on his best ridge field in 2005. Hybrid wheat on that field had been returning a consistent 56 to 58 bushels per acre for several years. Turkey Red on the same ground returned 31 bushels per acre. The protein qualified for heritage premium pricing. The yield reduction cut the economics to a loss compared to the hybrid program on his ground. Carl went back to hybrid wheat on his loam acreage the following spring. He did not mention this at the feed store. Raymond Stuckey farmed the south field and the lower east acreage in Turkey Red wheat from 2002 through 2014. 13 consecutive years. The average yield over that period ran 23 bushels per acre annually on ground the State Agricultural Office had formally classified as unsuitable for productive grain farming. His contract prices over those 13 seasons ranged from $22 to $34 per bushel as the heritage grain market expanded, as more specialty mills came online, and as artisan bakers and flour buyers developed enough of a track record to pay consistently for what they wanted. He retired from active farming at the end of the 2014 harvest season. He was 74 years old. His son David took over the operation. David added a second heritage variety, Red Fife wheat, on the remaining marginal acreage beginning in 2016. He opened contracts with 2 additional buyers in Denver that year. The yellow legal pad with $29 and $2.89 written on it stayed in the kitchen drawer until the house was repainted in the spring of 2009. Doreen found it during the repaint and set it on the counter. It sat there for a day and a half. Raymond looked at it once, put it back in the drawer. Gerald Owens at the Plains Heritage Seed Library retired from the organization in 2011 after 17 years running the grain program. Raymond sent him a note that December. 3 sentences. Gerald framed it and hung it in the hallway of the house in Salina, where he had spent those 17 years on the phone with farmers. The Form 17B assessment remained on file at the State Agricultural Office in Topeka. Productivity Class D. The designation was still accurate. The soil in the lower quarter of Raymond's property in Grant County had not changed. The clay was still 18 inches deep. The creek bed still ran water only 6 weeks a year. The south field still grows Turkey Red. Still Class D ground on every form that asks. Still averaging 23 bushels per acre in most years on soil that the assessor's measuring wheel said wasn't worth the seed it took to plant it. David Stuckey drove past the State Agricultural Extension Office in Liberal in the fall of 2018, on his way to a meeting with a grain buyer coming down from Denver. He did not stop. The seed Martin Stuckey kept in a candy tin for 35 years is still doing what it was bred for. Still growing in ground the form called worthless. Still working.